Get out of my way, you worthless maid. Elaine's voice cracked like lightning across the great hall, sharper than the thunder rumbling outside. Rain slashed against the wide Beverly Hills windows, palm fronds flailed in the wind, and the storm rattled the mansion as though echoing her fury. Maya William, only 29, stood trembling yet unyielding, her back forming a shield before Henry Carter's frail frame. The old man, 76 years old and once a proud army soldier, clung to her sleeve, his breath shallow, his skin pale beneath the soft glow of the chandelier. He whispered the words he always used when the world pressed too hard. "Steady, soldier." Elaine's eyes burned with contempt. Her silk gown shimmered. Her diamonds flashed under the lights. But her beauty was a blade without mercy. "You dare stand there like you matter?" she sneered. Then her voice rose, shrill and venomous, filling the room. "I wish you were dead already, so I could have all of this for myself." The words struck the air like a whip, echoing against the marble and silencing even the storm for a beat. Henry's head lifted, weak but unbroken. His voice trembled, yet carried the remnants of command he once barked on the battlefield. "You will not see that wish fulfilled," he rasped. "Not while I breathe, not while truth has a soldier standing guard." At the far end of the corridor, unseen by them, Richard Carter stood frozen. The 44-year-old billionaire had returned home earlier than expected, his footsteps stilled by the storm of voices. He watched in shock as Maya stood firmly, shielding his father from the fury of his wife. His heart thudded, torn between disbelief and dread. Elaine's rage boiled over. She hurled her half-full glass of red wine toward Henry. Without thinking, Maya flung her arm up, stepping into the line of fire. The crystal struck her forearm and shattered, crimson spilling across the carpet, shards biting into her skin. Blood streaked down her arm, mingling with the wine. Henry gasped. "Maya!" Elaine lunged forward, seizing Maya by the arm and shoving her against the wall. Her hand cracked against the young woman's face, then again across her shoulder. "Beg all you want," Elaine shrieked. "You dare defy me? You dare stand in my way? You're nothing but staff. If you feel for the character, please like this video and comment. Your location, maybe someone near you is watching too." Maya sobbed, voice breaking, pleading, "Please, ma'am, don't hurt me. He needs peace. Please stop." But Elaine struck again, fury pouring out in each blow. Her words stabbed as cruelly as her hands. "Pathetic girl. You'll bleed for him, and still, you'll lose. This house, this fortune mine." "Oh." It was then Richard rushed in, unable to remain still any longer. "Elaine, stop!" he shouted, grabbing her wrist before another strike could fall. His presence filled the room, but confusion clouded his face as his eyes darted from his wife to Maya, then to his trembling father. Elaine's expression shifted in an instant. Her voice turned sharp but laced with feigned innocence. "Richard, she attacked your father. I caught her, red-handed. Look at the blood, she meant to harm him." Maya staggered forward, clutching her bleeding arm, her voice desperate. "No, that's not true. I was protecting him. She tried to hurt Mr. Carter. Please, you have to believe me." Tears streamed down her face, her words breaking against the weight of accusation. Richard's jaw tightened, torn by doubt. The sight of blood, the chaos, the fear for his father, it clouded reason. His voice, heavy with authority, cut through Maya's pleas. "Enough, Maya, you've gone too far. You're dismissed. Leave this house at once." The words hit harder than Elaine's blows. Maya's legs buckled, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Sir, please, I beg you, I would never harm him. Please." But her voice cracked, drowned by sobs. She pressed her hand against her wound, bowed her head, and stumbled from the room, her cries trailing into the corridor. Elaine pressed herself against Richard's chest, feigning tears. "You did the right thing, darling. She was dangerous. She fooled us all." Richard said nothing, staring at the blood on the floor, his thoughts a tangle of shadows. In the servants' quarters, whispers filled the air. Some spoke with fear, voices trembling. "Did you hear?" Maya struck Mr. Carter. Others shook their heads, their faces pale. She was always too bold, always looking for favor. Yet a few sat in silence, sorrow in their eyes, knowing the truth but too afraid to voice it. One young maid whispered to another, if it could happen to her, it could happen to any of us. And so, as the storm thundered outside, the mansion fell into an uneasy quiet. Blood and glass still stained the marble floor, the smell of wine and fear heavy in the air. Henry's frail voice tried to rise but faded into silence, his body too weak to challenge the lie. Maya's sobs echoed faintly from the distance, fading as she left the only place she had known for years. The storm raged on, but within the Carter estate, another storm had taken root, a storm of betrayal, fear, and injustice that would not soon pass. The front doors of the Carter mansion closed behind Maya with a hollow thud, and for the first time in 3 years she was on the outside looking in. The rain had grown heavier, a relentless curtain that soaked her uniform in seconds. She pressed one hand against the wound on her arm, the sting of broken glass burning sharper in the cold air. Her tears mixed with the rain, blurring her vision as she stumbled down the stone steps into the driveway. Behind her, the mansion glowed with warm light, its marble halls still alive with whispers and lies. Ahead of her stretched only darkness, the long road curling down the Beverly Hills hilltop, slick with water and shadows. She pulled her coat tighter, though it did little to shield her. Each step felt like dragging the weight of the world. Elaine's shrieks, Henry's trembling defense, the glass shattering, Richard's stern voice cutting her down. "You're dismissed. Leave this house at once." The words replayed like a cruel refrain. Maya clenched her teeth, whispering through chattering lips, "I didn't do anything wrong. God knows I didn't." But the storm did not answer. Inside the mansion, Richard stood in the corridor long after Maya had gone, his pulse racing. Elaine clung to him, feigning tears, insisting Maya had tried to harm his father. But Richard's eyes lingered on the shards of crystal on the floor, the trail of blood leading to the door, and his father's frail hand trembling as it reached toward the empty hallway where Maya had disappeared. That image unsettled him more than Elaine's words. Later that night, while Elaine slept in their wing of the house, Richard slipped into the security office. He demanded the surveillance footage from the cameras outside Henry's room. The guards hesitated, nervous, but obeyed. The screens flickered to life. Richard watched, his jaw tightening. He saw Maya standing firm, shielding his father. He saw Elaine's hand hurl the glass, saw her shove and strike, saw Maya's body absorb every blow without retaliation. Richard's heart sank. The truth was undeniable. At dawn, Richard confronted Elaine in the grand study. The storm had passed, but another storm rose inside the mansion. "I saw everything," he said coldly. "The cameras don't lie." Elaine's face blanched, then hardened. "You'll ruin us both if you side with her," she hissed. Richard's reply was steady, almost icy. "You've already ruined yourself. This marriage is over." He handed her a set of legal papers, an annulment drafted by his attorneys. Elaine's shriek echoed through the house, but it carried no weight anymore. Within a week, she would be gone, her name severed from his fortune. Henry sat in his chair by the window, the morning sun falling across his lined face. When Richard entered, Henry's weak voice carried a spark of pride. "That girl, Maya, she stood like a soldier. Don't let her sacrifice be forgotten." Richard knelt beside his father, guilt pressing heavy on his chest. "I wronged her, Dad. I believed the wrong person." Henry's hand rested gently on his son's shoulder. "Then make it right." That evening, Richard found Maya at a modest diner on Wilshire Boulevard. She sat alone in a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee, her sleeve still stained with blood. When his shadow fell across the table, she looked up, startled, her eyes widening with fear. "Mr. Carter," she whispered. He sat down across from her, removing his jacket and setting it neatly on the seat. For a moment, he said nothing, only studying her face. The quiet strength, the weariness, the dignity unbroken despite her tears. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "Sita. Maya, I owe you an apology. I saw the footage. I know the truth now. You didn't harm my father. You saved him." Maya's lip quivered, her hands tightening around the coffee mug. You believe me? She asked, her voice cracking. Richard nodded firmly. I do, and I'm ashamed I didn't believe you when it mattered most. I let fear cloud my judgment. I let her manipulate me. His eyes lowered briefly. I'm sorry. Tears welled in Maya's eyes, falling freely now. Though they were no longer only tears of pain, they carried a trace of relief. She shook her head, whispering, I was only doing what was right. Anyone would have. No, Richard said, his voice resolute. Not anyone. You put yourself in danger when you didn't have to. You bled to protect him. That kind of loyalty is rare. Oh. He slid an envelope across the table. Maya frowned, hesitant, but opened it. Inside were documents. A new contract appointing her as Henry's personal caregiver, with a salary that exceeded anything she had ever imagined. Beneath it was a medical benefits plan covering full expenses for her mother's treatment back in Detroit. Maya gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Richard said softly. Come back. Help me give my father the dignity he deserves, and let me help your mother. It's the least I can do after what you've endured. Maya's heart swelled, torn between disbelief and gratitude. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and nodded. Yes, I'll come back. Richard exhaled, relief washing over him. For the first time in months, he felt something like hope return to the Carter name. Back at the mansion, the staff whispered again, but this time the whispers carried a different tone. The truth had begun to spread Elaine's cruelty. Maya's courage, Richard's reversal. Some still sneered, unwilling to let go of their envy, but others looked at Maya with newfound respect. She walked the halls not as a servant disgraced, but as a woman who had faced injustice and stood tall. That night, as Maya sat once more beside Henry's bed, she adjusted his blanket with gentle care. Henry reached for her hand, his grip weak but warm. Welcome home, soldier, he murmured. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes, and whispered back, I'm here, sir. I'm not leaving your side. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the air fresh with the scent of rain and renewal. The mansion stood quieter now, its marble halls cleansed of one shadow, its silence no longer heavy with fear but with the fragile beginnings of healing. Maya returned to the Carter mansion the following morning, her steps slower than before, but her spirit steadied by the decision she had made in that diner booth. The rain had passed, leaving the air crisp, and the mansion gleamed under the California sun, its marble facade glistening as though washed clean of secrets. Yet as she crossed the threshold, she felt the weight of every gaze upon her. The staff paused in their routines, trays stilled, brooms halted, whispers rippled through the air like a current. Some eyes glimmered with relief, even admiration. Others narrowed with suspicion or outright disdain. Richard had already announced his decision. Elaine was gone, her belongings packed and sent away under discreet legal orders. He had introduced Maya in the staff meeting that morning, his tone firm. She was no longer a maid, but his father's personal caregiver. It was a title heavy with responsibility and, perhaps more dangerous, visibility. Maya's new quarters were no longer in the cramped servant wing but in a small suite adjacent to Henry's room. When she stepped inside, she was struck by its quiet dignity. A writing desk with polished wood, a window overlooking the garden, shelves lined with medical supplies instead of the plain broom closet she once knew. She set her small suitcase down gently, fingers brushing over the smooth surface of the desk, her heart conflicted. This was more than she had expected, more than she thought she deserved. Henry greeted her from his bed with a smile that wrinkled his weathered face. My soldier, he said softly, reaching out his thin hand. You came back. I promised I wouldn't leave your side, she answered, settling into the chair beside him. She helped adjust his blanket, careful not to tug too sharply. And now I have a proper excuse to stay. Henry chuckled, a sound that was little more than a rasp but filled the room with warmth. Richard told me everything. He finally saw the truth. I only wish it hadn't taken your blood to open his eyes. Maya lowered her gaze, her sleeve still wrapped over the healing cut. It was worth it, she murmured, as long as you're safe. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Richard entered, carrying a folder under his arm. His tailored suit looked as sharp as ever, but his eyes carried the exhaustion of sleepless nights. He nodded at Maya with quiet respect. "How is he today?" "Resting well," she said. "Good," Richard replied. He turned to his father, his voice softer. "I'll be in meetings for most of the day, but I wanted to tell you both legal proceedings are moving quickly. Elaine won't be a threat anymore." Henry gave a faint nod, satisfied. Richard's gaze returned to Maya. "And you?" "I meant what I said. You're not just an employee now. You're family. If anyone gives you trouble, they answer to me." His tone was protective, but it carried a warning too. He knew how the household whispered. After he left, Maya walked the halls for the first time in her new role. She carried Henry's schedule in hand. Medication times, therapy appointments, meals. As she passed the staff gathered near the kitchen, their voices dipped, then rose again after she was out of sight. "She's got the boss wrapped around her finger," one maid muttered. "Don't be ridiculous," another replied. "You saw the footage. She saved Mr. Carter. Would you have done the same?" A third scoffed. "Maybe she staged the whole thing. Don't think she's not clever enough." Maya kept her head high, though her stomach tightened. She had learned long ago that words could wound as deeply as fists. But she refused to let them bend her now. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Stand straight, Maya. Don't let the world break you." At lunch, she wheeled Henry into the sunroom. The light poured through the tall windows, warming the air and casting long shadows across the chessboard he had left mid-game weeks before. She set out a simple meal: grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, his favorite comfort foods. He ate slowly, and between bites, he spoke. "You'll need thick skin, soldier," Henry said, his eyes sharp despite his frailty. "These halls echo with more than footsteps. They carry envy, fear, ambition. Elaine knew how to twist that. Others will try, too." Maya met his gaze. "I'm not afraid, sir. I know why I'm here. For you." Henry's smile was faint but proud. "That's the spirit. Remember, loyalty is a shield stronger than steel." Later in the afternoon, Richard summoned Maya to his office. She stepped into the vast space, walls lined with shelves of leather-bound books, paintings of Los Angeles skylines, and the faint scent of polished oak. Richard gestured to a chair. "There's something else," he said, sliding a document across the desk. "I've arranged for your mother's medical bills to be covered fully. From this day on, her care is my responsibility. It's not charity. It's repayment for what you've done for my father and for me." Maya's breath caught. Her hands trembled as she touched the paper, reading the assurance of coverage, the hospital's name in Detroit, the figures far beyond what she could ever manage. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the words. "Mr. Carter, I don't know how to thank you." Richard leaned back, his expression earnest. "You don't have to. Just keep doing what you've always done. Stand by my father. That's thanks enough." Maya swallowed the lump in her throat, her voice soft. "I will. I promise." When she returned to Henry's room that evening, she sat by his bed as he drifted into a light sleep. The house was quieter now, though the undercurrent of whispers remained. She gazed at the folded flag on his nightstand, its blue fabric dotted with white stars. It seemed to speak to her, a symbol of service and sacrifice that transcended wealth and marble walls. As dusk fell, she opened the window slightly. The cool breeze carried the scent of rain-soaked earth, a reminder of the storm that had passed. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, and whispered to herself, "I will not break, not here, not now." And for the first time in days, Maya felt something stronger than fear. She felt the beginnings of belonging, not in the mansion's grandeur, but in the bond she had forged with Henry, and in the fragile, cautious trust of a billionaire who had finally seen the truth. Outside, Los Angeles glowed with its endless hum of traffic and light. Inside, the Carter estate began to settle into a new rhythm, but beneath its polished surface, Maya knew battles still lay ahead, battles of loyalty, of justice, of dignity. She tightened the bandage on her healing arm, straightened her shoulders, and prepared herself. For though Elaine was gone, the whispers in the halls were only just beginning. The Carter estate stood gleaming under the California sun, but within its white stone walls and glass-paneled windows, silence carried a different weight. The storm had passed, Elaine was gone, and Maya had returned to her role no longer a maid, but Henry Carter's personal caregiver. Yet outside those gates, whispers had already begun to drift into the circles of the wealthy, spreading like wildfire through manicured lawns and high-walled gardens of Beverly Hills. It started with a dinner party hosted by a neighbor, where Elaine's absence was the subject of raised brows and clinking wine glasses. Divorce? One woman murmured, her pearl necklace gleaming under the chandelier. Over a maid? Another scoffed. Richard always was impulsive. Imagine throwing away a woman like Elaine for some nobody. The stories twisted with every retelling. Some painted Maya as a seductress, others as a schemer who staged a scene to trap her employer. Few believed the truth that she had shielded an old man from harm and paid for it in blood. Back inside the mansion, Maya felt the weight of those rumors before she ever heard them. She saw it in the sideways glances of the staff, in the hesitation of a chauffeur who once greeted her warmly but now avoided eye contact, in the nervous silence that fell whenever she entered the kitchen. Her new position had lifted her from servant to caregiver, but it had also placed her in a spotlight she had never sought. One afternoon, while helping Henry with his exercises, Maya overheard two maids in the hall. They say she's clever, that one. Knew just how to twist the knife so Elaine would take the fall. The other lowered her voice, though the words carried clear through the cracked door. Clever or not, she'll never belong here. People like us don't get promoted to family. We get replaced. Maya's chest tightened. She adjusted Henry's blanket with steady hands, but her mind echoed with their words. Henry, sensing her silence, looked up at her with eyes still sharp despite his frailty. "Don't let them shake you, soldier," he murmured. "A battlefield is full of noise. Only the steady survive." Richard, too, noticed the shift in the household. At breakfast one morning, as he scanned the Los Angeles Times, his jaw hardened at the column buried in the society section. Carter scandal raises eyebrows, billionaire ends marriage, elevates former maid. The article dripped with suggestion, weaving half-truths into speculation. Richard folded the paper sharply, his voice terse. They think this house is their stage for gossip. Maya, pouring Henry's tea nearby, froze at his words. Richard caught her expression and softened. "I'll handle it. You've already been through enough." But gossip was harder to silence than thunder. A week later, Richard attended a charity gala, and though he stood tall in his tuxedo, the whispers followed him. He's lost his mind. That girl must have something on him. Imagine trading a wife for a servant. Richard shook hands, smiled politely, but inside, each word dug deeper. When he returned home past midnight, Maya heard the weariness in his footsteps, echoing down the marble hall. Henry was awake, waiting in his chair by the window. When Richard entered, he sighed. "The wolves are circling, Dad. They think I've been fooled." Henry's gaze didn't waver. "Let them think. Truth doesn't ask permission. You saw what that girl did. She bled to protect me. How many in those glittering rooms would bleed for anyone?" Richard nodded, but doubt lingered in his eyes. He carried not only his father's honor but the weight of the Carter legacy, a name etched into skyscrapers and charities. Protecting that name had always come before anything else. Now he wondered if shielding Maya would burn it all. Maya felt the change most deeply during her first solo outing since returning. She walked to a nearby market to pick up Henry's favorite herbal tea. As she reached for the box on the shelf, she heard a sharp voice behind her. "That's her, the Carter maid." Two women stared openly, their manicured hands clutching designer handbags. One whispered loudly enough for Maya to hear, "I heard she trapped him with a sob story." These people always know how to play the victim. Maya's face burned. She clutched the box to her chest, forcing herself not to respond, not to let the tears rise. She hurried through the checkout, the cashier avoiding her eyes, and stepped back into the hot glare of the Sunday. She wanted to disappear, but Henry's voice echoed again in her heart. "Steady, soldier." That evening, when she returned to the mansion, Henry immediately noticed her downcast eyes. "Tell me," he urged. And so she did, haltingly, her voice trembling. When she finished, Henry squeezed her hand. The world will always have its cowards, Maya. They shout because they fear the truth. But truth doesn't need to shout. It just stands. And you, he tapped her chest weakly. You stand. Later that night, Richard came to her small suite with a folder. Inside were plans for a press statement and a foundation launch in Henry's name, focusing on veterans' care. They want to gossip about scandal, Richard said, his voice firm. Then we'll give them something real to talk about. Dad's service, his dignity, your loyalty. That's the story that matters. Maya's throat tightened as she looked at the papers. Mr. Carter, I don't know if I'm strong enough for all of this attention. Richard shook his head gently. You've already proven you're stronger than all of us. I owe you my father's life. And now, I owe you the truth. The world will see you for who you are, not who they whisper you to be. As she sat beside Henry that night, the folded flag on his nightstand catching the glow of the lamp, Maya felt a quiet resolve settle over her. She hadn't asked for this battle, but it was hers nonetheless. Not just to protect Henry, but to protect the truth from the claws of rumor and the cruelty of privilege. The whispers beyond the mansion's gates grew louder with each day. But inside, Maya straightened her shoulders, healed her wounds, and prepared to face them head-on. For though society might sneer, though envy might twist her story, she had something none of them could take: loyalty, dignity, and the unshakable heart of a soldier. The Carter mansion had never felt so exposed. Reporters lined the front gates, cameras flashing each time a car pulled into the driveway. News vans cluttered the street. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward, ready to broadcast every word that came from inside. For days, speculation had swirled across tabloids and television alike. Richard Carter, billionaire heir to a real estate empire, had divorced his wife under mysterious circumstances and elevated a former maid to a position that had the entire city whispering. Now, finally, he had called for a press conference to address the storm. Maya watched from the upstairs window, her stomach twisting. She could see the throng gathered below, umbrellas dotting the crowd as light rain misted the street. Their voices rose and fell, a chaotic hum that carried up through the glass. She turned away, pressing her palms against her knees to steady herself. She had never spoken before cameras, never stood before the eyes of the city. She had spent her life in the background, moving silently through other people's lives. Now, because of truth and lies woven together, she was being dragged into the light. Henry sat nearby in his chair, wrapped in a blanket, though his eyes remained sharp. Steady, soldier, he said, his voice rough but unwavering. The battlefield looks different now, but the principle is the same. You don't run from fire. You stand. Maya managed a faint smile, though fear gripped her. I'm not sure I can do this, Mr. Carter. They'll twist everything I say. They already think I'm a liar. Henry shook his head. The truth doesn't need polish. It just needs courage. Speak it plainly, and let them choke on their lies. Richard entered the room then, his suit immaculate, his expression a mask of calm that only barely hid the tension in his shoulders. It's time, he said. He looked at Maya for a long moment before adding softly, You don't have to speak if you don't want to. I can handle this. Maya hesitated. She could have stepped aside, let him carry the burden. But something deep inside told her this was not just his fight. It was hers, too. She rose slowly, her voice quiet but firm. I'll stand with you. The press conference was held in the grand foyer, where the marble staircase curved behind a podium draped with the Carter Foundation's banner. Lights from cameras bathed the room in harsh brightness. The air buzzed with the energy of dozens of journalists jostling for position. As Richard stepped to the microphone, silence fell, broken only by the clicks of cameras. Good afternoon, Richard began, his voice measured. I called you here today to put an end to the rumors surrounding my family. Much has been said, and most of it has been false. Today, you will hear the truth. He paused, letting the words settle. Several weeks ago, my father's life was endangered not by illness, but by betrayal. My former wife attempted to harm him in a moment of greed and cruelty. That night, someone else stood between them, someone who put herself in danger to protect him. He turned then, extending his hand. Maya William. The cameras swiveled as Maya stepped forward, her pulse pounding so loud she thought it might drown the silence. She stood beside Richard, her uniform replaced with a modest navy dress Richard's assistant had brought her. The lights blinded her, but she lifted her chin, steadying herself. Richard continued. Maya has been part of this household for 3 years. She has shown loyalty, kindness, and courage beyond measure. The rumors that she sought to harm my father or manipulate this family are lies. I have seen the evidence. She protected my father at great personal cost, and for that, I owe her more than I can ever repay. A reporter's voice cut through the room. Mr. Carter, are you saying your ex-wife attempted to murder your father? Richard's jaw tightened. Yes, the evidence has been turned over to law enforcement. The matter is in their hands now. Another voice shouted. And what about Maya? Isn't it true she was fired and escorted off the property that night? Maya's chest clenched. Richard turned to her gently. You don't have to. But she shook her head and stepped toward the microphone. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied as she spoke. Yes, I was dismissed that night. I was accused of something I didn't do. It was the worst moment of my life, but I knew the truth. I knew Mr. Henry Carter needed me, and even when no one believed me, I could not regret standing in front of him, because it was the right thing to do. Her words hung in the air. Some reporters scribbled furiously, others lowered their cameras slightly. A hush fell over the room. One journalist asked sharply, Maya, how does it feel to go from maid to personal caregiver to the patriarch of one of Los Angeles's most powerful families? Maya inhaled deeply, her eyes flicking toward Henry in his wheelchair nearby. His nod gave her strength. It feels heavy, she admitted. It feels like carrying a weight I never expected. But it also feels like honor, because it isn't about power or money for me. It's about doing what's right. Mr. Carter fought for this country when he was young. He deserves dignity now. If my part is to make sure he has it, then I'll carry that honor every day. The cameras clicked faster, flashes exploding in her eyes. But she did not falter. Another question flew from the crowd. What about your future, Maya? Do you see yourself as part of the Carter family now? Her heart pounded, but she answered steadily. I see myself as someone doing her job with loyalty. Families are built on love, trust, and sacrifice. If that's what we share, then maybe I am. But I never asked for a title. I only asked to be allowed to stand where I'm needed. The room stilled. Richard placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, silent but strong. The gesture spoke louder than words. When the conference ended, the reporters erupted into noise, voices shouting questions as security ushered them out. Richard guided Henry back to his room, while Maya slipped into a quiet hallway, her knees weak but her spirit alight. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. For the first time since that stormy night, she felt as though the truth had finally begun to breathe. In the kitchen, the staff whispered again, but this time their tones were different. Some still doubted, their envy coloring their words. She played her part well, yet others spoke with awe. Did you hear her? She sounded stronger than the boss himself. Fear lingered, but respect began to sprout among the cracks. That evening, Maya sat with Henry by the fireplace. He reached for her hand, his voice raspy but proud. You stood before the world today, soldier, and you didn't break. Maya smiled faintly, though tears welled in her eyes. I was terrified. Henry chuckled. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's standing anyway. And you stood. Now, outside, the lights of Los Angeles sparkled, reflected in the mansion's tall windows. Inside, for the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter, freer. The truth had been spoken, and though the world might twist it, Maya knew she had found her voice. And deep down, she understood. The whispers would continue. The challenges would grow, but she would no longer walk in shadows. She had stepped into the light, and she would not turn back. The press conference had ended, but its ripples spread far beyond the Carter mansion. By the next morning, Maya's face appeared on every major news site, her name trending across social media platforms she had barely touched before. Some headlines praised her bravery. The maid who saved a veteran, and loyalty in the shadows of wealth. Others dripped with suspicion, schemer or savior, and billionaire's scandal. From maid to mansion, the world seemed divided, and Maya found herself at the center of a storm she had never asked for. She sat in the sunroom with Henry, pouring his tea as the morning news played softly from the television. A commentator's voice filled the space. Public opinion is split. Some see Maya William as a hero who risked her life to protect Henry Carter, a decorated Army veteran. Others question the motives behind her sudden promotion and the billionaire's decision to annul his marriage so abruptly. Maya muted the screen, her hand trembling. She didn't need to hear more. Henry, however, reached out with his frail hand and touched hers. "Don't let them rattle you, soldier. The truth doesn't sway with headlines." Maya smiled faintly, though her chest ached. "It's not the headlines that scare me, sir. It's the people who believe them." Her fear proved true when she ventured into town that afternoon. Richard had insisted she take the chauffeur, but Maya refused. She needed to remind herself she was still a person, not a figure in a story. She walked into the market with a shopping list in hand, her modest dress clinging in the California heat. At first, the aisles felt normal, the scent of fresh bread, the hum of the refrigeration units. But soon she felt the eyes. Two women by the produce section whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "That's her, the Carter maid." The second snickered. "Looks ordinary enough. Hard to believe she brought down a marriage." Their laughter stung more than the cut that still throbbed faintly on her arm. At the checkout, the cashier offered a polite smile, then hesitated. "You're Maya, right? From the news?" His tone wasn't cruel, but the weight of recognition made her cheeks burn. She nodded quickly, paid, and hurried out. Outside, on the street, a man called after her. "Hey, you're the Carter maid." His voice wasn't mocking, almost admiring, but the attention tightened her chest. She ducked into the waiting car, wishing for invisibility. Back at the mansion, the staff was equally divided. In the servants' hall, whispers sharpened into arguments. One cook defended her, voice firm. "She saved Mr. Henry. That's all that matters." But another sneered. "She just got lucky. Now she'll milk it for all it's worth." Their words carried down the corridor, reaching Maya's ears as she carried Henry's medication tray. She paused, heart heavy, then straightened her back and kept walking. Richard called her into his office that evening. The newspapers lay scattered across his desk, their bold headlines glaring. He rubbed his temples. "The board is restless. Investors don't like scandal, even when it's built on lies. They're pressuring me to distance myself from you." Maya froze. "Distance? How?" Richard looked at her, his eyes heavy with guilt. "They want me to hire a professional agency for my father's care, to reframe the story. But I told them no, you stay. This house is yours as much as theirs." Her throat tightened. "Why fight for me, when it would be easier to let me go?" He leaned forward, his voice low but resolute. "Because I was wrong once, and I won't be wrong again. You stood when no one else would. That's worth more than their money." Henry, overhearing from his chair, let out a gravelly chuckle. For once, the boys got it right. Later that night, Maya sat alone in her suite, staring at her phone. Messages had flooded in, some from distant relatives she hadn't heard from in years, others from strangers who had found her on social media. Half were messages of support. "You're an inspiration. Thank you for standing up for Mr. Carter." But the other half were knives disguised as words. "Gold digger. You'll ruin him. Go back where you came from." Her hands shook as she scrolled. She set the phone down, covering her face with her palms. For the first time since the stormy night when everything changed, she felt the full weight of being truly seen, and not all eyes were kind. A knock came at her door. She quickly wiped her eyes. It was Richard. He stepped inside, holding a folder. "I've arranged for media training, if you want it. Professionals who can help you handle the attention." Maya shook her head. "I don't want to perform, Mr. Carter. I don't want to be polished or scripted. I just want to do my job and take care of your father." Richard studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then do just that. Let the world spin its stories. We'll answer with truth, not theater." The next morning, As she wheeled Henry into the garden for fresh air, the old man looked up at her with a mischievous twinkle. "They call you names, don't they?" he asked. Maya hesitated, then nodded. Henry chuckled weakly. "When I came back from the war, they called us names too. Said we were fools for bleeding on foreign soil. But we knew the truth of what we did. That truth kept us upright when the noise tried to break us. It'll do the same for you." Her eyes stung, but she smiled. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," Henry said. "Hard, but simple." As the days passed, support began to swell from unexpected places. Veterans groups reached out, praising her loyalty to Henry. Local churches sent letters, thanking her for embodying values of dignity and sacrifice. A neighbor even dropped off a homemade pie with a note. "Not everyone believes the lies. Keep standing." Yet the hostility remained too. Outside the gates, graffiti appeared one morning, "Made to Mistress." Richard ordered it scrubbed immediately, but Maya had already seen it. The words stung, but she refused to let them bend her. That night, she wrote a letter to her mother in Detroit, her handwriting steady despite the storm inside. "Mama, they can say what they want. I know who I am. I know why I'm here. And I know that standing straight, like Daddy taught me, is the only way through. Don't worry, I'll keep fighting." When she sealed the envelope, she felt lighter. The world outside might twist her story, but inside the mansion, she had a duty, and she would not abandon it. As she sat once more by Henry's bedside, adjusting his blanket, she whispered softly to herself, "I will not break." And in that whisper, she found the strength to face whatever echoes the spotlight would bring next. The invitation arrived in a heavy cream envelope sealed with gold embossing. Richard handed it to Maya at breakfast, sliding it across the polished oak table with an expression somewhere between pride and caution. "They're honoring my father at the Veterans Hall downtown," he explained. "The city council and several veterans organizations want to recognize his service. They've asked that you attend too." Maya froze with the envelope in her hands. Her fingers traced the seal, her chest tightening. "Me? But why?" Henry, seated at the head of the table with his blanket tucked neatly around his legs, gave a raspy chuckle. "Because you're my soldier," he said. "They know what you did. They know who stood guard when it mattered." Maya's heart swelled at his words, though fear crept in. The last time she had stood before cameras, her nerves had nearly undone her. Now she would be stepping into a hall filled not just with reporters, but with decorated veterans, officials, and strangers who had already formed their opinions of her. "I don't know if I belong at something like that," she admitted softly. Henry fixed her with his steady gaze, the same look he had carried on battlefields decades ago. "Belonging isn't given, Maya. It's proven, and you've proven it 100 times over." The morning of the ceremony, the Carter motorcade pulled up to the Grand Veterans Hall in downtown Los Angeles. Flags lined the entrance, fluttering gently in the breeze. Uniformed men and women stood at attention, their medals gleaming under the California Sunday. Cameras flashed as Richard helped his father from the car, Maya close by, her navy dress modest but dignified. She felt the eyes immediately, some curious, some skeptical, others warm with recognition. Inside, the hall was filled with the hum of conversation. Old photographs of soldiers lined the walls, faces frozen in sepia, testaments to courage across generations. Henry was guided to the front row, his presence commanding respect even in frailty. Maya remained close, her posture straight despite the tremor in her hands. When the ceremony began, the master of ceremonies, a retired general with a booming voice, recounted Henry's service. Captain Henry Carter, who led his unit through some of the most difficult campaigns overseas, whose valor saved countless lives. Today, we honor not only his service but the loyalty and dignity he represents. Applause thundered through the hall. Then the general's tone shifted, his eyes turning toward Maya. But service does not end on the battlefield. In his twilight years, Captain Carter found himself under threat not from an enemy abroad, but from betrayal at home. And in that moment, one woman stood in the breach. She is not a soldier by training, but she has the heart of one, Maya William. The hall erupted with applause. Maya's breath caught, her cheeks flushing. She glanced at Henry, who nodded proudly, his eyes glistening. Slowly, uncertainly, she rose from her seat and walked to the stage. The lights above were hot, the crowd's gaze overwhelming, but she forced herself to stand tall. The general gestured to the microphone. Maya hesitated, then stepped forward. I don't know what to say, she began, her voice trembling. I was never in a war. I was never given medals or uniforms. I was just doing my job. But when I saw Mr. Carter in danger, I remembered what my father used to tell me. Stand straight, Maya. Don't let the world break you. That night, I stood because I couldn't do anything else. It was the right thing to do. Silence filled the hall, heavy but reverent. She swallowed, her voice gaining strength. I didn't protect Mr. Carter because of duty or pay. I did it because he reminded me that dignity matters, that even in weakness, a man who has given his all deserves respect, and if I had to stand between him and harm again, I would. Every time. Mason. The applause this time was louder, some veterans even rising to their feet in salute. Maya blinked back tears, overwhelmed. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled, veterans approached her one by one. A woman with silver hair and rows of medals clasped her hands. You've got more courage than most who wore the uniform, she said warmly. A younger veteran added, We fight overseas, so people like you can fight for what's right here at home. Don't forget that. But not all voices were kind. Near the refreshment table, Maya overheard a sharp whisper. She's only here because of scandal. Don't let the story fool you. Another responded. Still, she spoke well. Maybe there's something to it. Their doubt lingered like smoke, but the warmth of those who embraced her outweighed the sting. Henry, tired but smiling, was wheeled beside her. You did well, soldier, he said softly. You carried yourself with honor. I couldn't have asked for more. Richard, too, stood at her side. For once, his public mask dropped, replaced by genuine pride. You spoke from the heart, and they listened. That's more powerful than any speechwriter could create. As they left the hall, reporters swarmed again, microphones thrust forward. Maya, do you see yourself as a role model? One shouted. Another asked. Do you plan to stay in the Carter household permanently? The questions came fast, but Maya kept her words simple. I'm just doing what anyone should, standing up for what's right. No. That evening, back at the mansion, the atmosphere was lighter. Staff who had once whispered now looked at Maya differently. One even offered a quiet smile, murmuring, You did good today. For the first time, she felt a shift, not full acceptance, but the beginning of respect. Later, as she sat by Henry's bedside, he drifted into sleep, his breathing steady. Maya gazed at the folded flag on his nightstand, its stars glinting faintly in the lamplight. She realized she had stepped into a new kind of battle, not one fought with weapons, but with truth, dignity, and resilience. She whispered to herself, steady and sure, I will not break. And in that quiet promise, she felt ready for whatever lay ahead. The morning after the veterans' ceremony, the Carter estate awoke to a storm of a different kind. News outlets replayed Maya's speech on a constant loop, her trembling yet steady voice declaring that dignity mattered more than wealth, that she would stand between Henry and harm again without hesitation. To some, she was a hero, her words stirring admiration across television screens and social media feeds. To others, she was a fraud, her presence at the ceremony proof of a scandal they refused to let go. At the breakfast table, Richard scrolled through his phone, his brow furrowed. Support is strong, he said half to himself. Veterans groups are rallying behind you, but the backlash is just as fierce. He handed the phone to Maya. On the screen was a news headline, Hero or Homewrecker. Debate over Carter caregiver heats up. Beneath it, comments scrolled endlessly. Some were messages of gratitude and encouragement. Others were vicious, accusing her of manipulating the family, of chasing wealth, of being nothing more than a maid who got lucky. Maya set the phone down quickly, her hands shaking. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. Henry, seated across from her, lifted his cup with trembling hands. That's the thing about truth, soldier. You don't get to choose who listens. Some embrace it, some fear it, some twist it because it makes them uncomfortable. But none of them can take away what you did. Richard's voice was firm. He's right, but we can't ignore the noise either. Some of the threats are getting serious. That evening, the mansion's gates became a stage for protest. On one side, supporters gathered with signs that read, "Stand with Maya," and "Loyalty Matters." Veterans saluted as cars passed, their presence calm but powerful. On the other side, detractors shouted insults, their signs cruel, "Gold digger," and "She doesn't belong." The clash of voices carried into the estate, echoing through the marble halls like a distant battle. Maya stood at an upstairs window, her chest heavy as she watched. The sight of strangers chanting her name in praise and in hatred left her unsettled. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, whispering, "I just wanted to do my job." Inside, the staff grew restless. In the kitchen, the cook slammed pots onto the stove. "It's chaos now." "All because of her," a younger maid countered quietly. "Because of her, Mr. Henry is still alive." The words sparked an argument that left the air thick with tension. Later that night, Richard convened a meeting in his study. Maya sat stiffly in a chair, Henry nearby in his wheelchair. Richard's face was set in determination. "We have two choices. We can withdraw, stay silent, let the rumors grow, or we can face them head on. Show the world that we stand united." Maya's voice was small. "And if that just makes it worse?" Henry reached over, placing his frail hand on hers. "Then we'll weather it together. You've already proven you won't break, Maya. Neither will we." The days that followed tested that vow. Anonymous letters arrived at the gate, some filled with gratitude, others with venom. One note, scrawled in angry ink, warned, "You don't belong here. Leave before it's too late." Security increased around the estate, guards patrolling the grounds, but the unease lingered. Maya tried to focus on Henry's care. She read to him from his favorite war memoirs, prepared his meals, walked him through the gardens when the weather allowed. Yet even in these quiet moments, the outside world intruded. One afternoon, a drone buzzed overhead, its camera trained on the mansion. Maya flinched, instinctively stepping in front of Henry as though her body could shield him from the intrusion. Guards chased it off, but the violation left her shaken. Richard found her later, sitting in the sunroom with her hands clasped tightly. "You don't have to endure this alone," he said. "The world may be divided, but this house isn't. You have me. You have my father." Maya looked up, tears brimming. "I'm not afraid for me. I'm afraid for him. What if all this noise hurts his health? He deserves peace, not headlines." Richard's jaw tightened. "Then that's what we'll fight for. His peace. And yours." One evening, as Henry dozed by the fireplace, Maya scrolled through her phone hesitantly. Among the flood of messages, one caught her eye. It was from a veteran in Texas. "I saw what you did for Captain Carter. Reminded me of the brothers who carried me when I was too weak to stand. Don't let the noise drown out the truth. You're one of us now." The words brought fresh tears, but this time they were tears of strength. The following Sunday, Richard invited a small group of veterans to the mansion. They arrived in pressed uniforms, their medals gleaming, their eyes kind. They shook Maya's hand firmly, thanking her as though she were one of their own. Henry beamed, his chest swelling with pride. "See, soldier, you've got comrades now, not just me." That night, as the mansion settled into quiet, Maya stood once more at her window. The protests outside had thinned, the supporters outnumbering the detractors now. The divided city still roared, but inside her, something had shifted. She realized she no longer stood alone. She had allies, she had purpose, and she had the unshakable knowledge that when the storm had come, she had not faltered. She whispered into the night, steady and calm, "I will not break." And in the silence that followed, she felt the truth resonate stronger than the noise outside. The week after the veterans' gathering, the protests outside the Carter estate took on a sharper edge. What had once been divided chants of support and scorn began to tilt toward menace. Hand-painted signs grew uglier, words scrawled in red paint that dripped like blood. Some nights, car horns blared for hours outside the gates, robbing Henry of sleep. The security guards grew restless, their radios crackling with warnings of suspicious activity nearby. Maya felt the tension as soon as she stepped into the garden one crisp morning. The air seemed to hum with unease, the distant shouts at the gate breaking the illusion of calm. She wheeled Henry along the stone path, the roses blooming around them in defiance of the chaos beyond. Henry's hand rested lightly on hers as if to remind her that even now, small beauties mattered. "They're louder today," he said, his voice raspy but steady. Maya forced a smile. "They'll tire themselves out. People always do." But she wasn't sure she believed her own words. That evening, the storm finally broke. A group of protesters, angrier than before, pushed against the wrought iron gates. Their shouts echoed through the night. "Send her out. She doesn't belong here." Fists pounded metal, rattling it until the guards rushed to hold the line. Lights from camera phones lit the darkness, capturing every moment for the world to consume by morning. From an upstairs window, Maya watched in horror as the crowd surged. Her heart pounded as though she were standing on the battlefield Henry had so often described. "They'll break through," she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Richard entered the room, his phone pressed to his ear. "Police are on their way," he said, his jaw tight. "Stay inside." But then a sound pierced the night, a rock crashing against the mansion's front window, shattering glass into the foyer. Henry startled awake in his chair, his breath shallow, fear etched into his face. Maya's instincts took over. She raced to his side, placing herself between him and the broken glass as shards skittered across the floor. "Stay back," she shouted at the guards, who were scrambling to push furniture against the entryway. The protesters at the gate roared louder, emboldened by the sound of breaking glass. Another stone flew, this one landing dangerously close to the window, where Henry Saturday. Without thinking, Maya spread her arms wide, shielding him with her body just as she had on that stormy night weeks ago. Richard rushed to them, gripping Henry's wheelchair, his eyes blazing with anger. "Enough of this," he muttered, his voice low but shaking. He turned to the head of security. "Double the guard. Call the precinct captain. I want every last one of them charged." The minutes crawled like hours. Finally, sirens wailed in the distance, blue and red lights flashing as police cruisers arrived. The crowd scattered in waves, some fleeing down the street, others lingering to shout their final insults before dispersing. The estate fell into uneasy silence once again, the only sound the clinking of glass being swept from the floor. Maya sank into a chair, her body trembling. Her arm still bore the scar from Elaine's wine glass, and now fresh scratches dotted her skin from flying shards. Henry looked up at her, his eyes filled with sorrow and pride. "Steady, soldier," he whispered. Once again, you stood. Richard knelt beside them, his face etched with guilt. "I never wanted you to face this, Maya. I thought by clearing Elaine out, by telling the truth, we'd find peace. But it seems the more we speak, the louder the world grows." Maya lifted her chin, exhaustion weighing on her but resolve burning in her chest. "Let them shout," she said quietly. "Shouting doesn't make them right. And if standing here means protecting Mr. Carter, then I'll stand as long as I have to." The next morning, the headlines exploded. Protest turns violent at Carter Estate. Photos of the broken glass, of Maya shielding Henry with her arms, dominated the front pages. For every cruel comment, dozens of others poured in from strangers thanking her for her courage. Veterans groups demanded investigations into the harassment, while online forums lit up with debate. In the staff quarters, the shift was palpable. The same cook who once grumbled about chaos, now muttered with grudging respect. "She's tougher than anyone gave her credit for," another maid whispered. "Did you see her? She didn't even flinch when the glass broke. She just stood there." The household, once divided, began to tilt toward admiration. That evening, Richard called Maya into his office. He paced behind his desk, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. "I've spoken with the district attorney," he said. "Charges will be filed against those who incited the riot, but that won't stop the noise. This isn't going away soon." "Oh," Maya clasped her hands tightly in her lap. "Then we'll just have to outlast it. The truth doesn't break, Mr. Carter, and neither will we." For a long moment, Richard studied her, something unspoken in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "You're right, and you won't face this alone." Later, As night fell, Maya returned to Henry's room. He was already asleep, the folded flag still on his nightstand, glowing faintly in the lamplight. She sat quietly beside him, her heart still pounding from the night's chaos. She thought of her father, of his words when she was a child. "Stand straight, Maya. Don't let the world break you," she whispered into the quiet room, steady and soft. "I will not break." And in that moment, despite the broken glass and the scars on her skin, she felt stronger than she ever had before. The summons arrived in a crisp white envelope sealed with the county's insignia. Maya unfolded the paper slowly, her eyes scanning the lines that confirmed what she already suspected. She was being called to testify as a witness in the criminal proceedings against the protesters who had turned violent outside the Carter estate. The date was set for the following week. She folded the letter carefully, her hands trembling. Richard found her in the sunroom, the paper clenched tightly in her fingers. His expression softened. "I know it's a lot to ask, but your testimony could mean the difference between justice and another cover-up." Maya swallowed hard, her chest tight. "I never wanted this kind of fight, but if it means protecting Mr. Carter and stopping them from hurting anyone else." She trailed off, her voice steadying. "Then I'll do it." Henry, who had been dozing nearby, opened his eyes at the sound of her voice. "You'll do more than testify, soldier," he said, his voice weak but firm. "You'll remind them that truth has a face. Yours." The days leading up to the trial were heavy with tension. Media vans camped outside the courthouse. Talk shows debated endlessly whether Maya's story was the tale of a hero or a scandalous fabrication. Each time she ventured out, she felt eyes follow her, whispers trail behind her. Yet every night, she reminded herself of Henry's words, whispering into the dark of her suite, "I will not break." When the morning of the trial arrived, the courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters. Supporters held signs with her name, while detractors jeered with cruel slogans. Richard's driver maneuvered the car through the chaos as cameras flashed through the tinted windows. Inside the car, Maya sat rigid, dressed in a modest gray suit Richard had insisted on. She clutched her bag tightly, her palms damp. Richard turned to her. "Once you're on that stand, just speak the truth. Don't embellish. Don't argue. The truth is enough." She nodded, though her throat felt dry. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. The protesters who had been arrested sat in a row, their expressions defiant. One man glared openly at Maya as she took her seat beside Richard and Henry. Another smirked, whispering something to his lawyer that made the defense table chuckle. Maya's stomach twisted, but she kept her gaze forward. The judge, a stern woman with steel-gray hair, called the session to order. The prosecution began with evidence. Footage from security cameras showing rocks hurled at the mansion, glass shattering, guards struggling to hold the line. The jury leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the violence replayed on the screen. Then came the witnesses' security guards, neighbors, even one frightened maid, who admitted she had watched from an upstairs window. Finally, the prosecutor called Maya to the stand. The bailiff led her forward, and she swore the oath, her hand trembling as she promised to tell the truth. She sat in the witness chair, the wood creaking faintly under her weight, the eyes of the courtroom bearing down on her. "Miss William," the prosecutor began gently, "can you describe what happened on the night of the riot?" Maya took a deep breath. "I was with Mr. Henry Carter. He was resting in his chair when the noise outside grew louder. I went to the window and saw the protesters pushing against the gate. Then a rock came through the window. The glass shattered." Her voice faltered, but she steadied it. "I stepped in front of Mr. Carter to protect him. More glass flew. I didn't think. I just stood there." The prosecutor nodded, her voice encouraging. "And did you recognize anyone among those who threw the rocks?" Maya's gaze shifted to the row of defendants. Her heart pounded, but she pointed slowly. "Yes, him, and him." She named them, her voice clear though her hands trembled. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The defense attorney rose swiftly, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Miss William," he said, his tone slick, "isn't it true you've been seeking attention ever since the so-called scandal with Mrs. Elaine Carter? That you've turned this family's misfortune into your own stage?" Maya felt heat rush to her cheeks. She glanced briefly at Richard, who gave a subtle nod, and at Henry, whose eyes urged her to stand firm. She steadied her breath. "I never asked for any of this," she said, her voice firm. "I never wanted to be in the spotlight. I only wanted to do my job. That night, my job was to protect Mr. Carter, and that's what I did." The defense attorney leaned closer, pressing harder. "Or perhaps you saw an opportunity. A way to climb from Maid to something more?" Maya's voice grew sharper. "If you think bleeding from broken glass, being cast out of my job, and having strangers shout at me in the street is an opportunity, then you don't understand loyalty. I stood there because it was right. Not because it was easy, not because it gave me anything. I stood because Mr. Carter deserved dignity." The courtroom fell silent. Even the defense attorney faltered before clearing his throat and muttering, "No further questions?" "No." When Maya stepped down from the stand, her legs trembled, but her heart felt lighter. Richard met her with a steady gaze, pride flickering in his eyes. Henry, though frail, raised his hand in a small salute. The trial stretched into the afternoon. By the time the jury delivered its verdict, the air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. Guilty. Several counts of incitement, destruction of property, and assault. The gavel struck, sealing the decision. Outside, as Maya exited with Richard and Henry, the crowd erupted. Supporters cheered, waving flags and signs. Some detractors still shouted, but their voices were drowned out by the swell of applause. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust into the air, but Richard held up a hand. "No comments today." In the car ride home, Maya leaned back against the seat, exhaustion washing over her. Her hands still trembled, but inside she felt a quiet strength. She had faced them, faced their accusations, their sneers, their violence, and she had not broken. Henry's voice, soft but clear, filled the car. "You carried yourself like a true soldier today, Maya. The battlefield was a courtroom, but you stood just the same." She smiled faintly, tears brimming in her eyes. "I was terrified." Henry chuckled weakly. "Courage isn't about fear. It's about standing anyway. And you stood." As the mansion came into view, the protests had thinned. The gates gleamed under the evening sun, guarded but quiet. For the first time in weeks, peace felt possible. Maya whispered to herself, steady and sure, "I will not break." And in that vow, she knew the fight was far from over. But she was ready for whatever came next. The morning after the verdict, the Carter estate finally felt still. The protests at the gates had quieted. The media frenzy had shifted to other stories. And Henry enjoyed his breakfast in rare peace. Maya sat beside him, buttering toast while the sunlight streamed through the tall windows. She thought perhaps life would return to its rhythm. Quiet mornings, gentle walks in the garden, evenings by the fire. But peace never lasted long in the Carter world. Richard entered the dining room holding a letter sealed with an emblem of an eagle and folded flag. His expression carried both gravity and pride. "This came by courier early this morning," he said, placing it in front of Maya. She frowned, wiping her hands before carefully breaking the seal. The letter bore the insignia of the National Veterans Association. Her eyes widened as she read aloud. "The board of the NVA would like to extend an invitation to Miss Maya William for her demonstrated loyalty and courage in protecting Captain Henry Carter. We wish to honor her with the Civilian Service Award at our annual national convention." Maya's hand trembled. "Me? An award? From them?" Henry chuckled, his voice hoarse but filled with pride. "Of course. They know a soldier's heart when they see one. You've earned it," Richard added softly. "It's one of the highest honors they give to civilians. They don't hand it out lightly." Maya's chest tightened. She thought of the courtroom, the shouts outside the gates, the cruel graffiti. For every voice that praised her, there were still others who despised her. "If I stand on that stage, won't it make things worse? Won't it paint an even bigger target on me?" Henry reached out, his frail fingers covering hers. "Every battle carries risk. But recognition matters, soldier. It tells the world the truth cannot be silenced. You stood for me. Now let them stand for you." That evening, the story broke in the press. Headlines flashed across every channel. "Former Maid to be honored by National Veterans Association. Support poured in from veterans groups nationwide. Social media filled with messages like, "Finally, a civilian recognized for real courage," and "Maya is proof loyalty still exists." But alongside praise came the venom. Anonymous emails flooded the Carter estate's inbox. Some were merely cruel words. Others were threats. One message chilled Maya to her core. "Step on that stage and you won't live to step off." The mansion's security doubled overnight. Guards patrolled the grounds, cameras scanned every corner, and Richard insisted Maya travel with protection even on simple errands. Still, she lay awake at night in her suite, staring at the ceiling, her heart racing. She had never feared for her life until now. Richard found her in the hall one late night, her face pale. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "How do you live like this? Every corner feels like it hides someone waiting to strike." "No." Richard leaned against the wall, his gaze heavy. "You don't get used to it. You learn to endure. My family's name has made us targets before. But this isn't just about me. It's about you. And I won't let anything happen to you." Maya's throat tightened. "But what if they hurt Henry to get to me? He's the one I'm supposed to protect." Richard's voice softened, carrying a weight of sincerity. "Then we protect him together." "No." The days passed quickly as preparations for the NVA convention began. The ceremony would be held in Washington, D.C., in a grand hall where presidents and generals had once spoken. The very thought made Maya's knees weak. Tailors arrived to fit her for a formal gown, while Richard handled logistics with the association. Through it all, she felt torn between gratitude and dread. One afternoon, while walking Henry in the garden, she voiced her fears. "What if they don't mean the threats as words, Mr. Carter? What if someone really tries to hurt me?" Henry's hand squeezed hers with surprising strength. "Then you face them with the same courage you faced Elaine, the same courage you faced those stones in that courtroom. Fear is natural, but it cannot rule you. You are more than fear." On the eve of their departure, Richard called the staff together in the Great Hall. "Tomorrow, we travel to Washington. Security will be tight, but I expect loyalty and discretion from everyone here. This is not just about an award. It's about the Carter family's dignity, and about honoring Maya for what she represents." His gaze swept the room, silencing the whispers that still clung to corners. When the meeting ended, a few staff members approached Maya. One young maid whispered, "I used to doubt you. I'm sorry. After everything, you deserve this." The words, though small, lifted a weight from Maya's chest. That night, as she packed her modest belongings for the trip, Maya paused to stare at herself in the mirror. For so long, she had seen only a servant, a shadow moving quietly through marble halls. Now, staring back at her, she saw something different, someone who had endured storms, lies, violence, and still stood. She whispered to her reflection, steady and sure, "I will not break." Meanwhile, outside the mansion walls, the threats sharpened. In a dark corner of the internet, anonymous voices plotted, their words chilling. "She won't make it to that stage. Mark my words." The Carter estate slept under heavy guard, but shadows lingered in the city. And as Maya drifted into restless sleep, unaware of the danger drawing nearer, the stage for the next battle was already being set. The private jet touched down at Reagan National Airport under a gray Washington sky. Rain threatened but held back, the clouds hanging low and heavy over the city. From her window seat, Maya gazed at the skyline, the Capitol dome rising like a sentinel against the horizon. Her stomach twisted. This was not her world-polished politicians, decorated generals, national ceremonies. She was just a woman who once cleaned floors in Beverly Hills. And yet here she was, arriving as the guest of honor at the National Veterans Association's annual convention. Richard guided his father down the jet's narrow steps, security flanking them on both sides. Henry leaned heavily on his cane, his body frail but his eyes alive. "The air here feels different," he murmured, a faint smile crossing his lips. "Like the weight of history presses down on your shoulders." Maya followed close, clutching her modest bag, her pulse racing as the convoy of black SUVs lined up to whisk them away. The moment they stepped into the terminal, she felt the shift. Reporters were waiting, their cameras flashing. Agents from the NVA, dressed in dark suits, moved swiftly to shield them, barking instructions into earpieces. The air crackled with tension. Inside one of the SUVs, Maya sat beside Henry while Richard rode up front. As the convoy wound its way through the city streets, the driver's radio hummed with coded chatter. She caught fragments: increased chatter online, credible threats, heightened security presence. She clenched her hands tightly in her lap. "They really think someone would try to hurt us here?" she asked softly. Richard turned slightly, his expression grave. "They don't think, Maya. They know. The FBI intercepted messages, plans to disrupt the ceremony. Maybe even target you directly." Henry reached over, his weathered hand covering hers. "Then let them try," he said. "A soldier doesn't run from the battlefield." The word steadied her, though fear still coiled in her gut. The convention center loomed large, a gleaming structure of glass and steel adorned with banners of red, white, and blue. Veterans in uniform gathered outside, their medals catching the light, while civilians lined the sidewalks holding flags. The energy was electric, celebratory, but beneath it hummed an undercurrent of unease. Police cruisers and armored vehicles flanked the entrances, and metal detectors funneled attendees through tight checkpoints. As Maya stepped out of the SUV, a wave of cheers rose from the crowd. Supporters held signs reading, "Maya, the heart of a soldier," and "Loyalty matters." She forced a smile, nodding politely, though her chest tightened when she spotted a smaller group across the street holding jeering signs, "Fraud," and "She doesn't belong." Their voices cut through the cheers like knives. Inside, the convention hall was a sea of uniforms and suits. Rows of seats stretched beneath chandeliers, the stage draped with flags. At the center sat a podium bearing the NVA seal. Maya felt her knees weaken as she imagined standing there, every eye fixed on her. In the green room, a security officer briefed them. "We've received intelligence, suggesting possible disruptions inside. We're monitoring closely, but be prepared for anything. Miss William, if at any point you feel unsafe, agents will extract you immediately." Maya swallowed hard. "And what about Mr. Carter?" "Mr. Carter will be protected at all times," the officer assured. Henry chuckled dryly. "Protect me if you must, but don't you dare whisk her away before she gets her moment." The ceremony began with solemnity. Veterans marched in, flags held high, the sound of drums echoing through the hall. The national anthem swelled, voices rising together. Maya stood beside Henry, her hand over her heart, tears pricking her eyes. She thought of her father driving buses back in Detroit, of her mother working her fingers raw in factories. They would never have imagined their daughter standing here, honored among generals and senators. The speeches unfolded one by one. Officials praised the sacrifices of veterans, the courage of those who served. Then the master of ceremonies stepped to the podium. "Today, we honor not only a decorated soldier, but a civilian whose bravery reminds us that loyalty and courage are not limited to battlefields abroad. Please welcome Captain Henry Carter and Miss Maya William." The applause thundered. Richard wheeled Henry to the stage while Maya followed, her breath shallow. The lights blinded her as she stepped up beside them. The MC handed her a medal suspended from a ribbon. Its weight felt enormous as he draped it around her neck. Just as she turned to face the audience, a commotion erupted near the back. A man leapt from his seat, shouting, "Fraud! She's a fraud!" Security surged toward him, but the chaos rippled. Another man stood, then another. For a heartbeat, panic threatened to consume the room. Gasps echoed. Cameras swung wildly. Maya's heart pounded, but instinct rooted her to the stage. She raised her voice, steady despite the fear. "I know some of you don't believe I belong here. I can't change your minds with words. But I didn't stand in front of Mr. Carter that night for applause or medals. I stood because it was right. That's all. I can offer you the truth." The hall quieted, her voice cutting through the tension. Security dragged the disruptors out, their shouts fading. The applause returned slowly, then stronger, until it filled the hall once again. Beside her, Henry's eyes shone with pride. "Steady, soldier," he whispered. After the ceremony, as they were escorted to the motorcade, Richard placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. "You faced them head on. You didn't run. That's what makes you different." She nodded, exhaustion pressing down on her, but in her heart, a quiet fire burned brighter. She had not only survived the threats, she had claimed her place in the light. As their convoy drove past the Capitol dome, Maya gazed out the window. The city hummed with power and history. But tonight it carried something else. Her vow echoing in her chest. "I will not break." And she knew now, more than ever, that vow would be tested again. The Carter convoy returned to Los Angeles under heavy guard, but even the hum of jet engines and the sweep of security lights across the tarmac couldn't ease the tension pressing on Maya's chest. The ceremony in Washington had ended in thunderous applause, but it was the shouts, the jeers, the sudden eruption of anger that lingered in her memory. She could still see the faces of the men pulled from the hall, their eyes wild with fury as they screamed she didn't belong. Back at the mansion, she tried to slip into routine. She brewed Henry's tea, helped him with his therapy, walked him through the garden, yet everywhere she went, the feeling followed her. Eyes watching. Shadows that stretched too long. It wasn't just paranoia. The guards had noticed it too. Cars idling longer than usual near the estate. A figure spotted twice outside the back gate. Security logs marked suspicious presence 3 nights in a row. One evening, as Maya adjusted the curtains in Henry's room, she noticed a reflection in the glass, a man lingering across the street, half hidden under a baseball cap. Her breath caught. The moment she turned, he walked away swiftly, disappearing into the night. She didn't mention it at first, not wanting to worry Henry. But later, as she carried linens through the hall, Richard intercepted her. "You saw him too, didn't you?" Her eyes widened. "You know?" Richard's jaw tightened. "The same man has been spotted 3 times now. We're increasing patrols, but I don't like it. Whoever he is, he's patient." Maya swallowed hard. "What does he want?" Richard hesitated, then answered bluntly. "You, or at least, to scare you." That night, sleep refused to come. Maya lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind looping through memories of broken glass, courtroom stairs, and the chaos at the ceremony. She whispered into the dark, trying to steady herself. "I will not break." But her voice quivered. The following afternoon, she ventured into town for Henry's medicine, insisting to Richard that she could manage with 2 security men at her side. The pharmacy was busy, the air filled with the smell of antiseptic and the quiet murmur of conversations. As she waited at the counter, a prickle ran down her spine. She turned, and there he was, the man with the cap, standing near the door, watching her. Her breath hitched. The guards noticed immediately. Moving closer, the man slipped outside, vanishing before they could reach him. Maya's heart raced as they escorted her back to the car. "He was there," she whispered, gripping her bag tightly. "He's following me." Back at the mansion, Richard's frustration boiled. He slammed his fist onto the desk in his office. "This isn't just protest anymore. This is stalking. Obsession." He looked at her, his voice firm. "From now on, you don't step outside without me, or the head of security. No exceptions." "No." Maya wanted to protest, to insist she wasn't helpless. But the truth was, the fear was gnawing at her. She nodded. "All right." Henry, when she finally told him, reacted not with fear but with anger. "They think they can rattle you, soldier," he rasped. "But a soldier doesn't bend to shadows. You keep standing." The next test came sooner than expected. 2 nights later, as the household settled into quiet, the security system triggered an alert. A camera caught movement near the east wall, someone climbing. Quick and agile. Guards rushed. Lights flooded the garden, but the figure escaped into the dark. The only thing left behind was a message spray-painted onto the wall. "Leave or pay." Maya stood with Richard and Henry as the guards cleaned the wall. The words glared back at her, stark against the stone. Her stomach churned, but Henry's frail hand squeezed hers. "Let them paint their threats," he said. "Your courage is written louder." Still, the pressure mounted. The next day, a package arrived at the mansion. Inside was nothing but a single photograph. Maya leaving the pharmacy, the stalker's shadow visible behind her. On the back, scrawled in red ink, "I see you." Maya's knees buckled. Richard caught her, his arm steady. His voice was steel. "This ends now. I'll find him." But Maya shook her head, tears brimming. What if he doesn't want me? What if he wants Henry? The thought hung heavy in the air. For the first time, even Henry was silent. That night, as rain began to fall, Maya stood at the window of her suite, watching droplets race down the glass. She thought of her father's words, of Henry's pride, of every vow she had made since the storm first broke weeks ago. She pressed her palm to the cold glass, whispering, "I will not break." Yet for the first time, she wondered not if she could endure, but if Henry could. The shadow stalking her was no longer just hers to bear. It was reaching for the man she had sworn to protect. And somewhere in the city, under the cover of night, the stalker watched, waiting for his moment to strike. The storm came without warning. Rain lashed against the Carter estate, the kind of heavy downpour that blurred the world into streaks of gray. The guards huddled under umbrellas at their posts, radios crackling as thunder rolled across the hills. Inside, the mansion felt uneasy, its marble halls echoing with the hum of wind and the occasional flicker of lightning. Maya sat in Henry's room, reading softly from one of his old war memoirs. He dozed in his chair, the folded flag on his nightstand illuminated by the lamp. But her eyes darted often toward the window, the storm making her nerves raw. The stalker's shadow lingered in her mind, his gaze, the photograph, the spray-painted words. Every creak of the house set her on edge. Richard had spent the evening in his office with the head of security, reviewing camera feeds and patrol schedules. If he tries anything, Richard told them grimly, tonight would be the night. The storm's our weakness. At midnight, the breach came. A soft crack echoed near the east wing, masked by thunder but caught by one of the cameras. A figure in black scaled the outer wall, slipping through the rain with practiced stealth. The alarm system blinked red in the control room. Radios erupted with orders, and guards sprinted toward the breach. Maya didn't hear the alarm immediately. She was tucking a blanket over Henry when she sensed a shift in the air. The faint scuff of a shoe in the hallway. She froze, her body tense. Slowly, she turned off the lamp, plunging the room into shadows. Her heart pounded as she whispered to Henry, "Stay quiet. Don't move." The door creaked open. A man stepped inside, rain dripping from his clothes, his cap pulled low. In his hand glinted a knife, its edge catching the faint glow of lightning through the window. His voice was low, mocking. "There you are. Thought you could hide behind your billionaire friends forever, didn't you?" Maya's pulse roared in her ears. She shifted, stepping between the intruder and Henry, her arms spread wide. "You don't belong here. Leave now before it's too late." The man laughed softly. "Too late? No, Maya. It's just beginning. People like you don't climb above your station without paying the price." Henry stirred behind her, his voice raspy but fierce. "You lay one hand on her, and you'll answer to me." The intruder sneered. "Old man, you're the reason she's here. You're the reason she thinks she matters. Maybe I should silence you first." He moved forward, knife raised. Adrenaline surged through Maya. She grabbed a lamp from the nightstand and hurled it toward the floor, shattering glass. The sudden noise startled him just enough for her to lunge, shoving him backward. The knife clattered to the floor, spinning under the bed. The man snarled, recovering quickly, and grabbed her arm. His grip was iron, twisting painfully, but Maya fought with every ounce of strength. "I won't let you touch him," she shouted, her voice breaking through the storm. The commotion drew Richard, who burst into the room with 2 guards. "Drop her!" he roared. The guards lunged, wrestling the intruder to the ground. The man thrashed violently, cursing, but was pinned and disarmed within seconds. Rainwater streaked his face as they dragged him to his feet. His eyes wild, fixed on Maya. "This isn't over," he spat. "You'll never belong here." Maya stood trembling, her chest heaving, blood from a fresh cut on her arm mixing with the rainwater he had brought in. Richard rushed to her side, gripping her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her arm burned. "I'm fine, Henry." She spun toward him. He was shaken but unharmed. His eyes locked on her with pride. "You stood again, soldier," Henry whispered, his voice steady despite the tremor in his body. "You didn't flinch." Security hauled the intruder out, his shouts fading into the storm. Richard's face was pale with fury. He'll never see daylight outside of a cell again. "I'll make sure of it." But Maya could still feel the man's words echoing in her ears. "You'll never belong here." They cut deeper than the knife ever could. Later, after the house settled into guarded silence, Maya sat alone in her suite, bandaging her arm. Her reflection in the mirror looked back at her eyes, haunted, shoulders heavy. She whispered softly, "I will not break." A knock came at her door. Richard entered quietly, his suit jacket damp from the storm. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I've seen courage in boardrooms, in battlefields of business, but never like this. You saved my father again, and you faced a man who wanted to end you." His voice softened. "I don't just owe you. I admire you." Maya lowered her gaze, her voice barely audible. "I was terrified." "That's what makes it real," Richard said. "Courage without fear isn't courage. Tonight, you proved again who you are. Not a maid, not a scandal. A woman who stands when others would fall." She blinked back tears, nodding. "I only did what was right." Richard gave a faint smile. "And that's exactly why they fear you." As dawn broke, the storm passed, leaving the mansion scarred but standing. Guards remained vigilant, and the intruder sat in police custody. But Maya knew the battle wasn't over. The shadows had grown bolder, stepping into the light. She stood at her window, watching the sun rise over the city. Her reflection merged with the morning light, fragile yet unyielding. She pressed her palm to the glass and whispered once more, "I will not break." And this time, she believed it with every fiber of her being. The rain had washed the city clean, but inside the Carter estate, the storm lingered. Guards patrolled the grounds with renewed urgency, their radios alive with clipped orders. The break-in had rattled everyone. Staff whispered in corners, their eyes darting nervously whenever shadows moved across the walls. Yet, it was not fear of weather or broken windows that unsettled them, it was the knowledge that danger had breached their sanctuary. Maya moved quietly through the hall, the cut on her arm hidden beneath a bandage. Every sound seemed louder now, the slam of a door, the distant clang of a gate. But she refused to let her unease show in front of Henry. He needed calm, not reminders of violence. She brewed his tea, sat by his side, and read aloud as if nothing had changed, though her voice trembled when silence pressed too long. Richard, however, did not rest. He spent the hours after the break-in at his desk, the glow of his laptop reflecting the hard set of his jaw, phone calls to detectives, meetings with security consultants, endless streams of reports all pointing to one question. Who was the man who had come for Maya? By dawn, the first answers arrived. The intruder's fingerprints matched a man named Daniel Ross, a former private security contractor with a history of violence. Arrest records hinted at brawls, unpaid debts, and a discharge under dishonorable circumstances. But it was his connections that alarmed Richard most. Bank transfers traced to anonymous accounts, all funneled through shell companies. The money trail whispered of something bigger. When Richard confronted the lead detective, the man's voice was grim. Ross didn't act alone. Someone paid him. And judging by the numbers, it wasn't just a one-time job. He was on retainer. This was organized. Richard's stomach sank. Organized by who? The detective hesitated before answering. "We're still digging, but some of the threads lead back to Elaine's old contacts. Powerful people. Ones who have a lot to lose if the Carters stand untarnished." That evening, Richard gathered Maya and Henry in the study. The fire flickered low, shadows stretching long across the walls. Richard set a folder on the table, its contents stark. Photographs, bank statements, names, scribbled in reports. "Ross wasn't working alone," he said. "He was hired, and whoever hired him isn't finished." Maya leaned forward, her stomach tightening. "You think this goes back to Elaine?" Richard nodded slowly. Elaine, and the network she built while she wore this family's name. Investors, political donors, business rivals. She knew our weaknesses. Now they're trying to exploit them. Henry coughed, his voice rough but clear. "So, it's not just about you, Maya. It's about us. They want to break the Carter name, and they'll use you as the weapon." The words cut deep. Maya lowered her gaze, shame creeping in. "If I'm the reason," Richard interrupted sharply. "Don't. You are not the reason. You are the target, because you stood for what's right. That threatens them more than anything else." Silence fell heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Finally, Henry spoke again, his tone steely. "Then we fight back. We expose them before they can strike again." Over the next days, the investigation deepened. Richard's legal team uncovered documents linking Ross to a shadowy consulting firm that had once advised Elaine during her marriage. That firm was tied to real estate competitors, lobbyists, even a disgraced senator. The picture was ugly. A web of greed and revenge spun around the Carter family. Maya listened as Richard explained the findings late one night, his voice low, his hands tracing lines on the documents spread across his desk. "They're not just after us, Maya. They want to send a message that anyone who crosses them will be ruined." She looked at him, her fear tempered by resolve. "Then we have to show them that I won't be ruined, that none of us will." The next test came swiftly. A journalist leaked parts of the investigation, twisting facts into suspicion. Headlines screamed, "Was Maya targeted or involved?" Talk shows buzzed with speculation that she had staged the attack to win sympathy. The mansion phones rang off the hook with questions, insults, and threats. Maya felt the weight of it crushing her chest. In the staff hall, some whispered again, the old doubts returning. "What if she's part of it?" One muttered. Another replied, "Did you see her face last night? She's terrified. No actress could fake that." Henry's faith never wavered. "Noise," he told her firmly when he saw her shaken by the tabloids. "All noise. Remember the field, Maya. When bullets flew, I listened for only one sound, the heartbeat in my chest. Yours is still strong. That's all that matters." Richard, too, doubled down. He called a press conference, standing before microphones with Maya and Henry at his side. "Attempts to smear this family will not succeed," he declared. "The truth is clear. Maya Williams saved my father's life, and for that she is under attack by those who fear loyalty and courage. We will not be intimidated." The room buzzed with questions, but Maya said nothing, letting Richard's words shield her. Yet in her silence, she felt the truth building inside. She could no longer be only a symbol. She would have to speak again, not for herself alone, but for Henry, for Richard, for the truth that had nearly been drowned in lies. That night, as she walked through the quiet halls, she paused at the window overlooking the garden. The rain had stopped, the sky clearing to reveal stars faint above the city lights. She pressed her hand to the glass, whispering once more, "I will not break." But deep in her heart, she knew the battle ahead would be unlike any she had faced. For the first time, she wasn't fighting just to protect Henry or herself. She was fighting against an entire web of power, deceit, and greed. And somewhere beyond the walls, those who had sent Daniel Ross were already planning their next move. The decision was made in the dim light of the Carter study. Papers littered the desk, maps of connections sprawled across its polished surface, every line leading back to the same conclusion. Silence was no longer an option. Richard paced the room, his jaw tight. Henry sat in his wheelchair near the fire, his face pale but resolute. Maya stood between them, her hands clasped, the bandage on her arm still visible from the break-in. "They think they can smear us in whispers and shadows," Richard said, his voice sharp. "Fine. Then we drag it all into the light. A public hearing. Evidence, witnesses, cameras. We'll expose them before they can twist the story again." Maya hesitated. The very thought of cameras, reporters, and an audience waiting to dissect her every word made her stomach tighten, but Henry caught her gaze. "This isn't about comfort, soldier. It's about truth, and truth doesn't survive in the dark." The following week, the plan was set in motion. A coalition of veterans groups, sympathetic senators, and watchdog organizations agreed to sponsor the hearing. The Grand Rotunda of Los Angeles' Civic Hall was chosen, its marble floors and echoing ceilings promising gravity. Invitations were sent to the press, and by the morning of the event, the building swarmed with reporters, their cameras flashing like lightning. Maya arrived with Henry and Richard under heavy guard. The crowd outside was divided, supporters waving flags, chanting her name, detractors jeering with accusations. The air felt electric, thick with anticipation. As she stepped from the car, someone shouted, "Fraud!" while another cried, "Hero!" The conflicting voices merged into a storm that rattled her chest. Inside, the hall was filled with rows of polished wooden benches, the dais crowded with officials and journalists. At the center stood the long table where Richard, Henry, and Maya would testify. Microphones gleamed under the bright lights. The murmur of the crowd echoed like distant thunder. The chairwoman, a stern woman in a navy suit, called the session to order. "We are here today to address allegations of a coordinated smear campaign and threats against the Carter family, specifically targeting Miss Maya William. Let us begin." Richard spoke first, his voice steady as he outlined the evidence. He presented the bank transfers, the consulting firm's connections, the testimony linking Daniel Ross to Elaine's old network. The screens behind him lit with documents and photographs. The crowd shifted, whispers spreading like ripples. Henry spoke next, his frail voice carried by the microphone. "I wore this country's uniform once. I bled for it. And when my strength failed me, it was Maya who stood where others faltered. That is why she is under attack, because loyalty terrifies those who thrive on betrayal." His words drew applause, though the gavel quickly silenced it. Then it was Maya's turn. She rose slowly, her palms damp, the weight of every eye heavy on her shoulders. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice quiet at first. "I never asked to be here. I never sought attention or power. I was a maid. My only duty was to serve quietly. But one night, I saw a man I respected in danger, and I stood. That's all. I didn't stand for fame. I didn't stand for wealth. I stood because it was right." Her voice grew stronger. "Since that night, I have been called a liar, a fraud, a thief of reputations. I have been stalked, attacked, and accused of conspiracies I never knew existed. But I will tell you this, none of it changes the truth. And the truth is this: I will not break, not for money, not for lies, not for fear." Applause erupted, despite the chairwoman's attempts to maintain order. Cameras flashed furiously, capturing her words, her steady gaze, her trembling hands clenched on the table. For a moment, the room seemed united, but then the counterattack began. A man in the audience stood abruptly, holding a folder aloft. "If we're talking about truth," he shouted, "then let's talk about hers." He handed the folder to a journalist, who quickly spread its contents. Within minutes, photographs and papers circulated, screens lighting with images from Maya's past old debts her family had struggled to pay, a juvenile court record from when she was 15 for shoplifting food. Gasps rippled through the hall. The opposing press seized on it instantly. "How can we trust her?" someone shouted. "Is this the loyalty we're celebrating?" Maya felt the blood drain from her face. Shame crashed over her, dragging her back to Detroit, to the nights when hunger had driven her to desperate choices. Her hands shook, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse. Richard slammed his fist on the table. That was decades ago. She was a child trying to feed her family. Nah, but the damage had been done. The camera zoomed in, capturing her silence, her pale face. The conspiracy had played its hand, using her past to tarnish her present. Henry's voice, though weak, broke the noise. "You dare dig through a girl's desperate past and call it evidence? I say it proves her strength." She rose from that, and she stands here now. Not hiding, not lying. That is more honor than most of you will ever know. Maya blinked back tears, her chest tightening. She leaned into the microphone once more, her voice trembling but unbroken. "Yes, I made mistakes. I was a child in a world that didn't care if I starved. But those mistakes don't define me. What defines me is that I stood when it mattered. And I will keep standing. If that makes me unworthy in your eyes, so be it. But it will never make me break." The hall was divided, applause on one side, jeers on the other. The chairwoman called for order, her gavel striking hard. "Enough. The testimony will stand. The evidence of conspiracy is clear. This hearing is adjourned." As the crowd erupted into chaos, Richard shielded Maya and Henry, leading them swiftly from the hall. Outside, the noise of the city crashed back in supporters chanting her name, detractors waving signs, journalists shouting questions. In the safety of the car, Maya leaned against the seat, her breath ragged. They turned my past into a weapon. Henry clasped her hand. And you turned it into truth. That's the difference. Richard looked at her, his eyes fierce. They think they've weakened you, but they've only proven how afraid they are, and fear means we're closer to the heart of their power than ever. Maya nodded faintly, tears streaking her cheeks but resolve burning in her chest. She whispered to herself, steady and certain, I will not break. And for the first time, she realized that her vow was no longer just for Henry, or for herself, it was for everyone watching who had ever been told they didn't belong. In the weeks after the hearing, the name Maya Williams spread far beyond the Carter estate. Newspapers called her the Maid who stood. Television hosts debated her words, repeating her vow I will not break until it echoed across dinner tables and radio shows. On social media, her face appeared beside veterans' flags and quotes about loyalty, courage, and truth. Some even called her a living reminder that ordinary people can be extraordinary. Maya, however, felt none of the glory. She rose each morning the same way, brewing Henry's tea, preparing his breakfast, reading him stories. Yet every step outside the mansion came with stares, sometimes admiration, sometimes scorn. At the market, a woman clasped her hand, whispering, You inspire us. But outside the pharmacy, a man spat at her feet, muttering, Fraud. She confided in Henry one quiet evening as the fire crackled. I don't want to be anyone's symbol, she admitted. I'm just a woman who did her job. Henry chuckled softly, though his voice rasped. Symbols don't ask to be symbols, soldier. They're forged by fire. And you've walked through flames. Whether you want it or not, people see themselves in you. Richard, meanwhile, recognized both the opportunity and the danger. He scheduled interviews selectively, ensuring Maya's words reached sympathetic ears while guarding her from ambush. We control the story, he explained. If we don't, they will. But their enemies had not gone silent. The same shadowy network that had hired Daniel Ross now regrouped, furious at their exposure. Leaked documents and desperate smears had failed, so they turned to darker methods. One evening, Richard's head of security entered the study with grim news. We intercepted chatter, he reported. They're planning something bigger, not just threats, action. Richard's jaw tightened. What kind of action? The guard hesitated. Assassination. Not subtle anymore. They want to end this permanently. The words chilled Maya to the bone. For days afterward, she caught herself jumping at sudden noises, glancing over her shoulder even within the mansion's guarded halls. At night, she lay awake, listening to the wind against the windows, wondering if shadows beyond the glass hid more than branches. Despite the fear, invitations continued to pour in. Universities asked her to speak. Churches wanted her story told to their congregations. Veterans groups requested her presence at events. Richard urged her to accept some. The more visible you are, the harder it is for them to destroy you quietly, he argued. Reluctantly, Maya agreed to an interview with a respected national journalist known for fairness. On the day of the broadcast, cameras filled the mansion's sunroom. Henry insisted on sitting nearby, his presence steadying her nerves. The journalist asked simple, piercing questions. Do you see yourself as a hero? Maya shook her head. Number heroes are people like Mr. Carter, who fought for this country. I just stood when I couldn't do otherwise. And what do you say to those who claim you don't belong in this world of wealth and influence? She paused, then answered with quiet strength. Maybe I don't. But belonging isn't about where you start. It's about what you stand for. And I stand for loyalty, for truth, for dignity. If that makes me an outsider, then I'll stand outside with pride. The interview aired nationwide, and the response was explosive. Supporters flooded the Carter estate with letters, flowers, even paintings of Maya holding Henry's hand. But with admiration came escalation. The threats turned sharper, more personal. One night, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a photograph of Maya and Henry in the garden, taken from a distance, scrawled beneath. Next time, no camera, only a bullet. Security locked down the estate. Guards patrolled in shifts. New cameras were installed. And Richard demanded FBI involvement. "This has gone beyond harassment," he growled. "This is terrorism." Maya struggled under the pressure. She hid her fear from Henry, smiling as she read to him, though her voice cracked at times. But alone in her suite, she wept, the weight of being both a target and a symbol crushing her. One night, Richard found her in the hall, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the cold marble wall. "I can't carry this forever," she whispered. He stepped closer, his voice steady. "You're not carrying it alone. You have me. You have my father. And now, whether you like it or not, you have thousands out there who believe in you." Her eyes glistened. "But what if I fail them?" Richard shook his head. "The only way you fail is if you stop standing. And I've seen you bloodied, terrified, accused, and you never stopped. That's why they fear you. And that's why they'll never win." The next blow came swiftly. Late one evening, as Richard reviewed documents in his office, the power cut out. The mansion plunged into darkness. Security radios crackled with confusion. Outside, a vehicle screeched away into the night. When the backup generators flickered on, they discovered the message spray-painted across the gates. "The end is near." Henry's voice carried through the dim light, firm despite his frailty. "They want us afraid, soldier. Don't give them the satisfaction." Maya stood at his side, her heart pounding but her spine straight. "I won't," she said quietly. She looked toward Richard, who clenched his jaw, fury burning in his eyes. "They think they can scare us into silence," he muttered. "They're wrong. Tomorrow, we go to the federal authorities. We lay out everything, every name, every account, every threat. We finish this before they finish us." Maya nodded, resolve settling in her chest like steel. She whispered to herself, the words more vow than comfort, "I will not break." But even as she spoke them, she sensed the storm was far from over. Somewhere beyond the gates, their enemies sharpened their knives, preparing for a strike unlike any before. And this time, she knew, the battle might not wait at the doorstep, it might come crashing straight into their lives. The day of reckoning came with a strange stillness. After weeks of chaos, shouts at the gates, threats scrawled in red, shadows slipping through storms, the Carter mansion was unusually quiet. Guards moved with clipped precision. The FBI had set up a command post in the library, and every window glowed with the faint hum of reinforced security. Yet in Maya's chest, unease coiled tighter than ever. Silence often meant the enemy was preparing to strike. Richard stood at the head of the study, a thick folder of evidence spread across the desk. Names, bank records, and transcripts lay in neat rows, all pointing back to the same tangled web. Elaine's former allies, a network of politicians and rivals who had seen the Carter family's downfall as their victory. "Tomorrow morning," Richard said, his voice firm, "we hand this to federal prosecutors. It will end them." Henry, frail but alert, leaned forward in his wheelchair. "If we make it to tomorrow," the words hung heavy. Everyone in the room knew he was right. Once the evidence left the mansion, the conspiracy would crumble. But tonight, the enemy had their last chance to strike. Maya spent the evening by Henry's side, reading to him as thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. He watched her with a faint smile. "You've carried me farther than I thought I'd go, soldier," he murmured. "Whatever comes tonight, remember you've already won." "You stood." She clasped his hand, tears pricking her eyes. "I'll keep standing. For you." It was just past midnight when the first explosion rocked the grounds. A car at the outer gate erupted in flames, its heat lighting the night sky. Alarms blared, guards scrambled, and radios crackled with shouts. "Multiple intruders, east perimeter breached." The mansion shuddered with the sound of gunfire. Richard burst into Henry's room, his face pale but controlled. "They're here. Stay behind me." Maya's pulse pounded as she helped Henry into his chair, pushing him toward the reinforced inner hall. The mansion's lights flickered as another blast shook the walls. Shadows moved past the windows, armed men in dark clothing. slipping like predators. The intruders stormed the foyer, smashing through doors with weapons raised. The guards met them head-on, but the attackers were ruthless, driven by desperation. For a moment, it felt as though the mansion itself had become a battlefield. Maya and Richard pushed Henry down the corridor, the air thick with smoke. Suddenly, a figure stepped into their path, tall, broad-shouldered, his cap pulled low. She recognized him instantly, one of Elaine's closest associates, a businessman whose name was scrawled across the evidence folder. His eyes gleamed with cold fury. "You should have stayed silent, Carter," he hissed, aiming his weapon. "And you?" His gaze snapped to Maya. "You should have known your place." "No." Richard moved instinctively, stepping in front of Henry. But Maya lunged forward first. Her arms spread. "If you want him, you'll have to go through me," the man sneered. "Gladly." He raised his gun. But before he could fire, a sharp crack split the air. One of the FBI agents appeared at the corridor's end, his shot forcing the intruder back. Chaos erupted: gunfire, shouts, the crash of splintering wood. Maya grabbed Henry's chair, pushing with all her strength as Richard returned fire with a guard's weapon. They burst into the grand hall, the chandelier above swaying dangerously as smoke and sirens filled the air. Another attacker charged, but Maya seized a broken cane from the floor, swinging it with desperate force. The man stumbled, crashing into a column. Her arms trembled, but she didn't falter. At the far end of the hall, Elaine herself emerged from the shadows. Her once polished appearance was gone, her eyes wild with rage. "You ruined everything," she spat, her voice sharp as glass. "That fortune, that legacy, it was mine. And you," she pointed at Maya. "You took it from me." Maya's breath caught. "You tried to destroy your own family. I only stood where you wouldn't." Elaine's face twisted. "Then tonight, you fall." She raised a pistol, but before she could fire, Richard's voice thundered through the hall. "Enough, Elaine." He stepped forward, his weapon trained steadily. "It ends here." For a heartbeat, the hall froze, smoke curling, eyes locked, the weight of betrayal pressing down. Then Henry's voice, frail yet commanding, cut through the chaos. "Elaine Carter, you dishonor every vow you ever made. You dishonor me, this family, this country, and you will not win." The sound of approaching sirens grew louder. FBI agents swarmed through the shattered doors, overwhelming the intruders. Elaine dropped her weapon with a scream of fury as agents pinned her to the ground. The remaining attackers were dragged away, their shouts drowned by the crackle of radios and the barked commands of law enforcement. Silence fell at last, broken only by the hum of emergency lights. Maya stood trembling in the middle of the hall, blood streaking her sleeve, her breath ragged. She turned to Henry, who gave her the faintest of smiles. "You stood again, soldier." "Oh." Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded. "I stood." By dawn, the estate was secure. Evidence of the conspiracy filled FBI vans, and Elaine was in custody. The headlines the next morning declared the truth. Carter conspiracy exposed, former wife arrested in plot against family. Photos of Maya shielding Henry during the chaos spread across every outlet. This time, there was no question. She was no fraud. She was the woman who stood when the world tried to break her. That evening, Richard called a quiet gathering in the garden. The roses glistened with dew, the air fresh after the storm. Henry sat in his chair, his blanket tucked neatly, while Maya stood beside him. Richard raised a glass, to loyalty, to truth, and to the woman who reminded us both what it means to stand. The staff, once divided, lifted their glasses too. Even those who had doubted her now looked at her with respect. Maya lowered her gaze, humbled. "I never wanted to be more than what I was. But if standing for what's right makes me something else, then I'll keep standing." Henry reached for her hand, his eyes shining with pride. "You are family now, Maya. Not by blood, but by honor. And honor is stronger than blood." She felt tears spill down her cheeks. But this time they were not of fear. They were of belonging. For the first time, she believed it. She belonged. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the garden, Maya whispered her vow once more, steady and certain. I will not break. And in that vow, the story closed not with wealth or titles, but with dignity, justice, and the unshakable truth that one person's courage could stand against the darkest storm. The story of Maya William reminds us that true strength is not measured by wealth, titles, or the power of influence, but by the courage to stand when standing is hardest. She was not born into privilege. She carried scars of poverty and mistakes of youth. Yet when faced with betrayal, cruelty, and danger, she chose dignity over silence and loyalty over fear. For those of us who have lived long enough to know how heavy the world can be, Maya's journey teaches that honor is not given by society, it is proven in moments of trial. The voices of slander, the shadows of hatred, and even the violence of enemies could not break her, because her foundation was truth. The lesson is clear. We cannot always control the storms around us, but we can decide whether we bend or stand. And in standing for what is right, even the most ordinary life can become extraordinary.